Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Hoskins. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director for Titronics Research and Development. In the 1980s, Titronics developed one of the very first paraspinal thermography units in chiropractic. The history goes back a long way, and we're going to share that with you. But Dr. Curry asked me to present the evidence-based reason to use thermography in the chiropractic clinic. So we're going to talk about the evidence, we're going to talk about the physics, we're going to talk about physiology. What are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? And then we're going to talk about some of the philosophy behind why would we even do that in the first place. Back in the 1960s, a book was written by the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. I'm going to go through that in a different setting here in a little bit to show you some of the excerpts that they brought out even in the 60s. Back in the 20s, when paraspinal thermography was first developed within chiropractic, and the neurocalorimeter was created, patented, and sold by B.J. Palmer and Dasa Evans in 1926, they understood that the imbalance between left and right on the temperature along the spine could indicate a location of interference in how the body wanted to work, the innate intelligence, the expression of life itself, of balancing and adapting. But let's go back another 2,000 years. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, if you will, understood that when there is inflammation, when there's irritation, when there's imbalance, heat's going to be expressed on the skin in different ways in different amounts over a different time. And so what he would do is he would spread a thin layer of mud over the spine or over the arm or wherever he was investigating. And what he found was where the mud dried out quickest was areas of increased heat, and especially if it was in balance with the rows around it, and that was his area of concern. So this is not a new technology. This is not a new area of concern. This is not a new knowledge base. It's been used in medicine. It's been used in all the other healing arts around the world for millennia. We've just come up with a new way of doing it with new technology called paraspinal thermography. Back even before the 1920s, B.J. Palmer developed the neuroencephalomintempograph, and that measured nerve patterns that show the information being carried along the nerve paths. And what he found was when there's an imbalance in the regulatory system of the body, interference in the transmission of those impulses, there was also an imbalance in temperature on either side of the spine. In the 1960s, the book I talked to you about that we're going to go back and show you in just a little bit, they tracked all of the neurology, they tracked the physiology, they tracked the hematology, the blood patterns, so that we can see why that's important. A couple of new things that have come out, and I apologize, I don't have references because this is a personal talk and it's not been published yet. But Dr. Schwartz, who's a diplomat in thermology, he talked to me about this hunter reflex, this hunter response that the nervous system has, that when he either surgically removed or there was traumatic removal of the autonomic nervous system, or if the person or the animal was born without the sympathetic chain even, the signals from the autonomic nervous system still found their way to the specific spot. And he said, it's amazing how the body gets done what it needs to get done. I said, welcome to chiropractic philosophy. We call that innate intelligence. So as we go through this, hopefully the reasons behind what we do will be clear. The research that's been done for almost 100 years will be clear to you, and you'll know where to find it. And the reasons why we do what we do, and the reasons it can be used on a daily basis with every visit on every patient, pre and post. You can see why that's valuable to have in a clinic setting. So we're going to go to a different format where I'm going to be sitting in front of my computer with the slideshow with the references so that you can see what I'm talking about, and then we can cover that clearly. I'll come back at the end and we'll talk some more. Well, welcome back to this part of the studio. Sorry about my breath. Allergies really kicked up today, and obviously my system is expressing itself in a wheezy way, and I apologize for that. I hope it's not distracting. But let me give you the title of what we're going to be talking about today. It's really paraspinal thermography, the physics, physiology, and math. We're probably not going to get to the math part because that's a little bit outside of the scope and outside of the time frame that we have to deal with. But what I want to start with is the story of two men. These two men are actually twins, and they grew up together. They ate the same food, raised by the same family, and they got the same job, the same training, the same experiences in life. And yet, one of the the men, when they were 58, died, and one of the other one lived to be a pretty good old age. And the study of medicine is why the one died early, and the study of chiropractic is why the other one lived a full life, it lived longer. And that is what we're really getting down to. If we study the anatomy and physiology of what's going on in the body, of why the body works the way it is, we can understand that a life lived fully is one of adaptation, and one of balance, and one of resilience. And so we're going to start out with a talk about anatomy and physiology, and it's going to be about the cervical spine and about how things are organized. As I mentioned in the introduction, this is a book by the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. It's called Segmental Neuropathy. There are some digital downloads available for it, and I highly recommend this because this really gives all of the information physiologically and gathers it all together in one spot so that we can take a look and see what's going on here. And as you can see on the right side here, it shows all the different pathways for all the sensations from all of the mechanical receptors that go into the dorsal root ganglion of the spinal cord. And it even shows one going to the temperature receptors here on the skin. And that is really important because that is part of its job, is to balance all of this out. Even some of the viscera get involved in the local sensorial conversational tone. This overview of how this whole part has a conversation rooted in tone and tension and balance and being in tune with each other is pretty amazing. If we go on to this next one, it's called The Confluence of Systems. And it shows how pain feeds into the dorsal horns, and the visceral function has some feedback into the dorsal horns, and it is influenced by the ventral horns. Muscle balance, even up into the cortex and the subcortex and the medulla and the brainstem. But notice here, we have skin temperature as a total different system. And the reason that's important is this is where we get rid of our heat. This is how we balance and regulate the heat dissipation in our body. This is critical component of being a mammal, is heat dissipation and heat regulation within the body. So let's take a little bit deeper look. This is from basicmedicalkey.com. It's neuroanatomy of the autonomic nervous system. This is just basic common knowledge. The parasympathetic and sympathetic innervation of the autonomic effectors, which are the organs, vessels, and glands, is organized differently than it would be by the peripheral nervous system, the innervation that we use for skeletal muscle. The autonomic nervous system effectors require a chain of two neurons. The peripheral nervous system is one. The cell body lives inside the spinal column, and the axon exits and it goes to its target cell. In the autonomic nervous system, we actually use the sympathetic chain. So we have the primary cell, if you will, within the spinal column, and the secondary cell body, which gathers information from multiple primaries. That lives outside. It's called a ganglion. And there's some in the chin ganglion. There's also some, as we know, part of the gut system. The preganglion always lives in the central nervous system, either in the spinal cord or the brain. And then as it leaves the spinal cord or brain, notice what this says here. It's thinly myelinated as it leaves the central nervous system. It's always within a specific ventral root of the spinal cord. It's within central cranial nerves. So it's very, very specific in how it works. And that's very important to realize, that it's not myelinated as well as the main sensory, the peripheral nervous system that we get information from, that we can feel and be aware of. And it's not as myelinated as the peripheral nervous system, giving commands to the skeletal muscle and the other. And here we go into a little bit of the thoracic spine here. We can see the lateral horn is where the sympathetic nervous system lives. And through the ventral horn, it goes out into the ganglia, and then some come back and go out and actually parallel and travel with the peripheral nerves, but some go on through their own nerve systems to go to their target cell. And that's something we know, something we've learned and should have memorized back when we were in school. So it's just a rough review of what's going on here. The cell body of the postganglionic neuron is located in the autonomic ganglion. I'm not going to read this to you. It's from the same thing, but I'm going to point out some of the important things. Again, the axon of the postganglionic neuron is unmyelinated. So it's very susceptible to any kind of pressure. Very, very, very susceptible. The myelination not only insulates it from outside electrical impulses, but it also protects it from pressure. And so these autonomic nervous system components are unprotected from pressure. And we have to be very, very aware of that. Both the preganglionic and the postganglionic neurons frequently travel with the components of the PNS, which I already pointed out to you. And they're intermingled with all the different types of nerves going to the target cells. And then most effectors, or the targets, are innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic. However, that's not always the case. And these fibers produce antagonistic but coordinated responses in the effectors. And again, this is from basicmedicalkey.com. If we go to a picture of this, again from the 1960s CMCC book, we can see that that's exactly what it shows. We can see that the sympathetic chain here, even at the C1 level, feeds the autonomic nervous system through the nerve roots by the sympathetic chain. And so that's what this picture is showing. If we go on to the next one, again, this is the same reference. Descending input from higher centers regulate and adjust all the activity of the ones below on a preganglionic level. This descending input is part of several specific reflex pathways. It is also used by the higher centers to institute widespread bodily changes. This is just telling us, as we all know again from basic pre-graduate, undergraduate studies in the autonomic nervous system, the autonomics, or the automatic nervous system, is there to just make sure our body's adapting well, staying balanced, and has this resilience to deal with anything and everything that our environment throws at us. That's its definition of function, is to respond to the stimulus around us. So let's take a look at about different components of what's going on here. We're mostly concerned with blood vessels and mostly concerned with blood vessels because we're talking about heat dissipation. So when we talk about the autonomic nervous system, the target system and target organ is the blood vessels. The parasympathetic have no effect on most blood vessels. The sympathetic is only effective to constrict the blood vessels and the viscera, which increases blood pressure. So that's one of the things. That's from Wikipedia. This is, again, from Wikipedia. The sympathetic nervous system, it promotes the fight or flight response. It diverts blood away from the GI and the skin via vasoconstriction. It diverts it to the muscles and to the lungs so that we can get away from whatever scared us. That's its job, is to constrict those things down when it's excited. So when we go into a sympathetic state, that's what happens. Again, from KinHub, this is another website that talks about it, just gathering the same information, presenting it in a different format. In the skin, the sympathetic nervous system is what gives us goosebumps. It's what constricts the capillaries, causes sweating. Parasympathetic nervous system doesn't have much effect on the skin. In fact, no effects is what this says. We're going to the next reference. This is basicmedicalkey.com. Again, the skin, the sympathetic influence is contraction or vasoconstriction, causing the lumina of the vessel to constrict, to get smaller. Parasympathetic effect has no direct effect on the skin or the cerebral blood vessels. Here's a diagram, again from the 60s CMCC published book that we've referred to. And it just shows that the lumen, when in a relaxed state, or in this state, is collapsed. When it's relaxed, it opens up. And so the constriction of the muscle is active, its relaxed state is open. So when we talk about anatomy physiology, we talked about the spinal cord, the dorsal horn, the nuvert, then the chain ganglia. And we need to also talk about the capillary beds. The only function of a capillary bed is, in our context at the skin, is to carry heat as a direct function. That's its only job. Its only direct function is to carry heat and dissipate it. That heat that's carried is directly related to the diameter of the blood vessel. The larger the caliber, the more open it is, the hotter that area is. The more constricted it is, the colder that area is. So in a relaxed state, it's dilated, and in an excited state, it's constricted. So the capillary beds, again, its only function is to dissipate heat. When we understand that, we can understand that when the sympathetic nervous system is enacted, when it constricts, it causes that area to get cold, so that all the blood that would have been going there to dissipate heat is diverted to the other areas of the body that are needed to fight flight, to the muscles, and to the brain, and to the lungs to get air into the system so that the muscles can do their job of getting away or fighting off that lion, tiger, bear, to do what needs to be done to survive. So now that we've covered the anatomy and physiology of what we're actually looking at, which is the capillary beds on either side of the spinous process that live between the spinous and the transverse, knowing that their only function is to dissipate heat, knowing that their only control is a sympathetic nervous system, now we can look at what thermography is. So we know what the physiology is now, which part of it we're looking at. But now we need to understand what is thermography and why are we looking at this part. Fundamentally, you just take apart the word thermography. Thermo means heat, and graph or graphy is the art of creating a picture or a chart out of that. And what it means. Thermography or temperature taking by itself means nothing. All it does is give us a data point. What was the temperature at that point, on that spot, at that time, period. Now, with other assessments packaged together, over time, measuring the same things, making other observations, we can make some pretty good educated guesses about what's going on with the system. And again, like I stated before, Hippocrates did this 2,000 years ago with mud. A little bit more of the history, D.D. Palmer, before he discovered, invented, created chiropractic, he was using the back of his hands to sense hot spots, and they would do tracing of nerves, and the heat generated along not neurotomes but thermotomes. It's another new term that the thermology is creating, but the thermotomes, those strips in our body that the heat tends to travel, and it's associated with the innervation of the capillary beds. Over time, you notice these patterns when things are going on, and so it can mean things over time. But fundamentally, by itself, thermography doesn't tell us anything except for what the temperature was at that point at that time. How is that useful? Again, I told you, over time, understanding physiology, understanding some philosophy, which we haven't got to yet. If you understand some of these basic things, you'll understand why this can be useful, and is very useful as a non-invasive technology for us as chiropractors to use in our clinics and in a clinical setting on a regular basis on every visit, pre and post. So why is it useful? Well, again, sympathetic nervous system regulates this capillary bed tension, if you will. If it's working normally, it's adapting, which means it's constantly opening and shutting, in balance with the left and right. Left and right should be in tune with each other. They should have this tone with each other. So as things happen, they open and close in harmony, in tune with each other. When there's an imbalance, one side's stuck while the other side is still doing its job. And so if we're taking thermographs over time and we see one side constantly adapting and one side stuck, we can tell that something's not, the regulation that's going on is not getting to that part of the capillary beds. And that should in a clinical setting will make us aware that something might be going on. We need to do more investigation in why is this one side not responding to stimuli? Why is it not in an adaptive state? Why is it not balancing with the other side? And do some more investigation. The other thing that's really important about understanding thermography is, first of all, thermography is very sensitive. It's repeatable, it's reliable. It's intra and inter-examiner reliable on a different state. So much so that it's actually used to validate other studies, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. So that's, since it's been around so long, since it's so non-invasive, because it's so sensitive, because on a instrument basis it's so repeatable and reliable, that gauge study I'll cover in just a second, it can be used to validate other studies, and it is. So how is thermography, I'm going to talk about the graphy, the charts, why is that so useful, and why would it be useful in a clinical setting? Well, if what we're tracking can be precision, can be shown to be precise, can be shown to be accurate, and shown to be relative to what we want to study, these charts, these graphs, are really understandable. They're very shareable to other people who know the basics. And over time, put together, they can give us a lot of information about what's going on with that person's autonomic nervous system, and therefore core of what's going on as a system, as a whole person, organically, holistically. We have to understand that it's only one ingredient in determining the presence of what we would call the chiropractic vertebral subluxation, or the vertebral subluxation complex. In this context, whatever that entity is and whatever name you give it, this is just one ingredient in determining whether that imbalance in the autonomic response, dysautonomia, if you will, that middle layer, Dr. Jamie Browning goes into that in detail about the three different layers, that dysautonomia, that imbalance that happens in a living organism that's not fatal immediately. What's going on with that there? It's also one ingredient establishing what we call patterns in chiropractic. And that pattern is, if there's an interference there, it's always going to manifest itself in a non-adaptive state that all the assessment tools can pick up on. And so we can use this to help establish that pattern. And since it's non-invasive, since it's immediate, since all the technology, all the different companies that do this, show you on a computer screen instantly what's going on with this, we can actually show change between pre and post. With the adjustment in the middle. For pre-scan, determine that the adjustment's necessary, do the adjustment, and do a post-scan. We can see change even be in the pre and the post. And that's why it's so valuable on a visit-to-visit basis, pre and post, to see if change is actually happening. If we have beforehand a non-adaptive state on one side, and afterwards we have an adaptive state that's back in balance with the other side, that could indicate that the interference in the instructions was overcome and the body's back into a balanced adaptive state, and that is a good place to be. And then usefulness of thermography, we can get to some very, very high-end analysis of the data, even down to chaos math charting and chaos math analysis. That's probably not in the scope of this. We're already 25 minutes into this, and we're just getting the different levels defined here. Now, there are limits and boundaries to thermography as well. It's only temperature. It's only temperature. It's only temperature. There's only temperature at that spot at that time within the context of that time and place. And so we have to not take any technology by itself and say, this technology gives me that listing that there is that chiropractic vertebral subluxation. We have to be careful not to do that, because there is no technology that gives us all the components of the definition of a subluxation, which we'll get to in a moment. But used over time with many pictures, we can notice the patterns. We can notice what a normal presentation is. We can also recognize a stuck or an out of normal pattern or an out of normal presentation. Then we can also recognize what's pattern. What means we recognize this, they've been here before with this. This is what they usually have when they have this listing. And so we can develop a pattern with that. In the preponderance of evidence, thank you, Dr. Browning, put that together to develop what's called pattern. Now, talking about that book from 1960s, this is the Dynamic Chiropractic magazine from 1994, talking about the the group by these researchers from the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. And this is what they say in 1994, 30 years later. The work was published under the auspices of the CMCC, so advanced in thought and vision that it's just now beginning to be understood by chiropractic science. So they were so far ahead just by taking the understood stuff and putting it together in the way that they did, that it's taken 30 years of constant review. That Dr. Story wrote in 1994 that it's just now beginning to be understood by chiropractic science. The nerve pathways involved in the control they've been well documented in the field of neuroanatomy, not just chiropractic, but in the field of neuroanatomy. The biomechanical alteration that occurs in the presence of vertebral subluxation, it alters the functions of these nerve pathways. Again, this is from that 1994 book. Wow. Publication of Dynamic Chiropractic. The reason I say wow is I graduated in 92, so this has been a long time, almost 30 years. And then again, I hate reading slides, but it's because of the abnormal function of these pathways that the thermographic asymmetries verify the presence of vertebral subluxation. The chiropractic adjustment corrects the vertebral subluxation, can be observed when the thermograms are returned to a normal symmetry. This slide right here sums up the entirety of what I'm trying to tell you in this 1-hour presentation. Now, going on in the article, it says, a chiropractic thermography enables the doctor, us, to evaluate the neurophysiology, which is critical to the health of the human organism. We have to understand what's going on around us and respond accordingly to have health. The nerve system is part of more than just sensory and motor. It's part of the immune system. There's a whole new study of the psychoneuroimmunology study. You get a PhD in that now, about how the mind, how we think affects how our mind works, it affects the immune system. There's even some recent articles in the last 10 years that says that what we are is a brain walking around in everything that just supports the brain. And the immune system is intricately involved with brain activity and brain vitality. Science now confirms what we've said since 1895. It also says that low-resolution thermography is an economical instrument which enables doctors to be the best they can be at tracking down vertebral subluxations and knowing when they have been corrected. Again, this is from 1994. In 1988, even before that, the Journal of the Canadian Chiropractic Association, it says, in the correlation of thermography with spinal dysfunction, preliminary results, spinal dysfunction to the JCCA is what we would call the chiropractic vertebral subluxation. It says, in conclusion, there is convincing evidence that thermography could provide objective evidence of segmental dysfunction. There are questions pertaining to the exact relationship, sensitivity, and relationship to thermographic findings to chronicity, which should be addressed in future studies. They're saying there's convincing evidence that there is, but we need to do more studies to find what that relationship is. Again, this is 1988. And also in 1988, the Journal of Neurosurgery. This is not a chiropractic magazine by any stretch. They said that a deviation of as little as 0.2 degrees Celsius, which is about 1 degree Fahrenheit, between left and right, can be used as a standard in the assessment of sympathetic nerve function. Not only in an assessment, but also to the degree of symmetry is directly related to the amount of dysfunction. So they're studying foot differences in thermal asymmetry. They're talking about different areas of the body, left and right. But what they said is it's so well regulated in a healthy individual that if we have a 1 degree or 0.18 degree Celsius, I guess that's really half a degree Fahrenheit, that little of a difference between left and right, that is a standard that can be used to say that there is sympathetic nerve dysfunction. And the more dissymmetry there is, that is a quantifiable indicator of how much dysfunction there is affecting their nervous system. Again, this is 1988. So the short time we've had already together, the last 30 minutes, we've talked about the physiology. We just kind of, in the introduction, talked a little bit about the history. I'm going to go over that now with the history of how thermography and chiropractic developed. We've talked a little bit about some of the research back in the 80s and 90s that really cemented paraspinal thermography into not only a valid use, but also on how it can be used in pre and post to validate that something happened at the adjustment that brought balance and adaptability back to that individual. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the history of chiropractic. Like I introduced before, Dr. Palmer, D.D. Palmer, before he developed chiropractic, before BJ developed the neurocolimeter, before the neuroencephalomentigraph, I had that memorized, and every time I try to speak it, it's a tongue twister. So we're just going to call it the tympograph because that's what BJ Palmer called it in volume 30 of his green books. He called it the tympograph, so I feel like I can do that too, if you'll allow me to do that. And so they would actually trace these hot patches and call them nerve tracing, when actually the current term, just coined in the last 5 years, is thermotomes. So we know about dermatomes, we know about sclerotomes, we know about neurotomes. Now there's something called thermotomes. These are the slices in the body that are related when there's a temperature variation. So that's what they were doing back in the before 1920. In 1925, B.J. Palmer and Dasa Evans patented the neurocolimeter. Now this is a paraspinal thermography unit, but it only gives the difference between left and right. It doesn't give you the raw temperature. So my introduction, when I said that Titronics invented the paraspinal thermography unit, I was referring to not only taking the temperatures on both sides, but also giving the raw data from both sides, not just giving the delta or the difference. So I thought I'd clear that up here. Now that you've probably already written me a bunch of emails saying how wrong I was, that explains what I said. So in chiropractic thermology or thermography, again, D.D. Palmer used hot boxes. In 1920, Dos Evans, he was an electrical engineer that was employed at the B.J. Palmer, or at the Palmer Chiropractic College, going through in school. Legend has it that he overheard a conversation. He said, "Hey, I can make that happen," and so they created and patented the neurocolimeter in 1925. Interesting side note, 1926, when it was presented at Lyceum, and B.J. Palmer says, if you're not using the neurocolimeter, you're not practicing chiropractic. That is kind of what started the diaspora in chiropractic, of all these colleges exploding about that time, because they hated the fact that B.J. Palmer told them they weren't practicing chiropractic for the last 20 years since they graduated. So there's a lot more to that, and we can talk about that on a side note. The interesting thing was when Clay Thomas was director of clinics, some of the students came up and says, we've been studying that if the sympathetic nervous system is affected, then the capillaries close down. And so if that's the case, if the sympathetic nervous system is impinged upon by our definition of chiropractic, then that should relax the capillary beds and actually be cold on the side of the affected level. And therefore, it's not the heat, it's the cold that indicates which side. And the story goes, and it's just a story, it's an anecdote to kind of fit this part of the history. It was brought to B.J. Palmer's attention, and with Clay Thompson there and some other the clinic directors and heads of departments there presented it. And they said, "What do you think?" B.J. Palmer says, "Stood up, stomped his foot on the ground, hit his hand on the table. He goes, as long as I'm alive, it's going to be heat. Heat's always going to decide which side is the side of listing." And so that's kind of where that stood. I'm going to propose a different response. I'm going to propose that it's not heat versus cold, but it's actually the imbalance. The imbalance between left and right. The inabilities, whatever's interfering with the body's response, whatever side is stuck, is the side of interference. And that should affect our listing. Not which side's hotter, which side's colder, but which side is stuck. So I'll leave that with you. All right, so now some of the physics to go along with the paraspinal thermography. If you look on the left, this one right here, this is actually from 1925. This is Dawson D. Evans' instrument he came up with. It had two thermocouples on the end, had a flexible wand that went out so it could stay right along the spine. They would run it up and down the spine, and they would just see a needle here pointing left or right to which side was hot. And they would track that, and they were trained to reproduce what they saw on the needle sway back and forth. Needle breaks the breaks is what the Gonstead calls it. To recreate that sitting at a table after they did it on the person. They had all kinds of they had classes in contraptions to help people focus and remember and come up with ways to remember where these breaks were. The one on the right is 1951, so 30 years later. This is actually patented, interestingly enough, by the Reading. And then the next one we have, this is really cool. And this is the first one that actually has two dials, but it doesn't give us the differential. It only gives us left and right. It doesn't give us the delta. Interestingly enough, this is 1970, or 1967 was the patent. That was within 2 or 3 years of that article being published by the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. This is built in bakelite. It's kind of cool to see. But again, it doesn't give us all three pieces of data. It doesn't give us the delta like this one does and like this one does. All it does is gives us the raw temperature left and right, and then we have to graph out what the delta is. And then in 1984, Roger Titone came on, and he was an electrical engineer. He's also an optical engineer. And he's like, why aren't we treating this radiation like we do X radiation when we take films? Why don't we get rid of scatter? Why don't we find out what the temperature is at that point without letting the thermocouple touch the skin? There's a lot of problems with the thermocouple scraping the skin, hygienically and function-wise. Why don't we add more thermocouples to make it more, the resolution higher? And then why don't we put a lens in there so we can actually amplify the radiation coming off the skin? And so that's what we have when we look at this right here. This is in 1984. This is what, or 1980s. This is what Roger Titone and Titronics came up with to put the barrels between the skin and the temperature receptors, put serial amplifiers in there to amplify the signal so a computer can read it, and then record it and display it on a computer. This just shows the number of thermometers in there or to sense the heat. And that just shows some of the stuff. Again, this is not a thing about the technology of the scanner itself, but this just kind of in historical perspective shows the development of the actual physics of how we deal with recording the temperature. The earliest ones was direct contact a little bit bigger, direct contact showing us left and right, but no computer connection to show us or track all the different analysis we can do. And then this is the progress in technology from the contact thermocouple to the collimated, amplified, focused thermocouple. All right, so we've already talked about the imbalance. Let's just cover this again. Again, it's the imbalance. The capillary beds are only influenced by the sympathetic autonomics. The parasympathetics have no influence. We've already discussed that. If the sympathetic stimulates, the sympathetic signal only causes constriction, which causes lack of blood flow, which decreases heat dissipation. And then in the adaptive state, we would expect balance. Then in a non-adaptive state, or what we would call a vertebral subluxation, that would be stuck and the other side would be adapting, colder and hotter. So it's not about whether it's cold or hot on that one scan. It's really about which side is stuck. Which side is stuck. So, understanding the physiology, understanding the physics, understanding the instrument, understanding how all of that is reliable and useful, I'm going to show you one more paper. And this is an interesting paper in and of itself, because this is, let me find it here real quick. This is a paper that is done by an instrument manufacturing study. This is a gauge repeatability and reproducibility study, the GRR, the gauge study. The gauge study is used in manufacturing to see how precise and accurate an instrument is in the manufacturing process of automotive and aerospace and other industries. Peterson, Pfeiffer, and Kissman from Cleveland put the Titronics, the C3000, actually through this study. And what they found was that the passing GRR in industry is 0.25 to 4, which is the allowable range. The GRR in healthcare is 4, because we're dealing with humans, not with metal. They gave it a little bit the bigger one. So they said if you can have an instrument be within the results of a 4, then that's really good for a healthcare instrument. Well, the Titron was 3.53. There you go. The examiner error was having a 3.44, and therefore the instrument itself only had a 0.78 score, which is less than half for gauge accuracy at a manufacturing level, micrometry in industry manufacturing. So that's how precise and accurate this instrument is. Again, this was done in... So that's the gauge reproducibility study. Now, why is that important? Well, that says the instrument does what it says it's supposed to do. Now, we can take this instrument and use, because it does what it says it's going to do. Titronics is not the only instrument that's included in this. CLA's Thermoscan also does this, has this kind of use in research. I'm just pulling these out because this is the information I have because of my affiliation with Titronics. So here we have a study in March-April of 2004 by Owens Hart, D'Onofrio, Haralambous, and Majewski. This is JMPT, and they use this to study the intra and inter-examiner reliability of using the scan. So the intra and inter-examiner reliability using the C3000 found to be very high, with ICC values between 0.9 and 1.8. 1 means everything was exactly the same. And so they're saying that if people are trained how to use it, or at least use it the same, you're going to get the exact same results, no matter who uses it. And whether you come back and do the same scan or somebody else picks it up and does the same scan, the instrument does what the instrument's designed to do, which is take temperature of that spot at that time, using the technology that it has. And so that's just one study. I already talked about the gauge study. So this is another study done in 2007, and it's using the scanner to validate the methods of the computer results of the analysis. So they're assuming that the results that the scanner gives to the computer is valid and accurate and precise. And so Hart, Amato, Boone, Brown, and Ashton are taking that assumption that it's right. And again, this little abstract shows that it's like, hey, it's been proven and described elsewhere. We're just going to use that. Now we're going to take the data and make sure that the data analysis is reliable as well. So not only is the instrument proven to be reliable by the gauge study and by the other study we showed earlier, this one in 2004, in 2007, the computer programs have been validated, and here we have the JCCA in as late as 2015, again publishing reliability interpretation of the pattern analysis, using again the C3000 as its standard. And you can go through this. I can provide all of these results for you. But it just goes to show you that this is not a new technology. This is not just invented in the last 5-10 years. If you look at the history of chiropractic in 1915, chiropractic adopted the use of X-rays. In 1925, paraspinal thermography was invented within chiropractic, and so we're almost 100 years into paraspinal thermography. It's been shown to measure what it says it measures. The physiology is doing what we say it does. and the reliability of the instruments, not just Titronics, but all of them. The inter-examiner between people, the intra-examiner, me doing the same scan, has shown to be extremely, almost perfectly reliable. So much so that now these other research studies, I've just shown you a few samples here, are using the scanners to prove their results. How can it be used in a evidence-based basis in chiropractic, especially in the chiropractic office visit? Let me do a little bit of philosophy review with you, and then we'll wrap that up and answer that question. So to kind of wrap all this up, we need to understand what we as chiropractors do. What we do is we detect, locate, analyze, and assist in the correction of this entity that I call the chiropractic vertebral subluxation. B.J. Palmer calls it vertebral subluxation. Other people have other names for it and other definitions of it. But here's something we do know, and it's not new. It's been in all the major publications. The vertebral subluxation has been quoted and used as a viable term. It's not a historical concept that's never been provable. Over and over again, just in these short articles you've seen, it's there. It's in the literature. It's been used as an active, current, viable term. And no matter what you call the chiropractic vertebral subluxation, that's what we do as chiropractors. We help the body get over that, to correct it, to heal from it, to go on from it, to reconnect the brain to the body. The original definition had these 4 parts: the malposition, malfunction, the disrelationship of a vertebral with its neighbors above or below, which causes the occlusion of the foramen between, that puts pressure on the nerve tissue, which causes interference in the transmission of mental impulse or the instructions. Now, Kent argued in 1996 that all theories, the 25-part theory, the disafferentation, nerve compression theory, the garden hose theory, the hard bone soft nerve theory, all of them, no matter which one, the 27 component, the 3 pillar, whatever ones you want to call it, they all fit back into this 4-part model. In fact, he said that Lance, which he quotes in this article and references also in this article, said that really it comes down to a kinesiological function, a function of the anatomy, and the neurological involvement is the function of the nerves and the carrying of the message. He says you can actually really boil it down to just those 2. So we have neuromusculoskeletal. The point is, if we as chiropractors believe that our job is to detect, locate, analyze, and assist in the correction of vertebral subluxation, detect, locate, and analyze are really important to what we do. I mean, that's the objective of the objective part of our notes is you come in with something, I do my tests, my assessments, I detect that there's something there, I detect that it's what we say we do, I locate it, I analyze it, I give it a name, I give it a listing, and then I'm going to assist your body in correcting it. So if we had an instrument that was non-invasive, that was fairly inexpensive, that was well understood, it was reliable, precise, accurate, and it didn't matter if we did it every time, or if we had an associate do it, or if we had an assistant do it. It didn't matter because the instrument itself was so reliable, inter and intra-examiner, that would put a very high value on that instrument or that technology or that assessment tool to help us detect, locate, and analyze. That's the value of thermography. It's non-invasive. It's well understood. It's well studied. It's well proven. Not only can we use it in the pre-adjustment, but we can also use it post-adjustment. We set up protocols in our office pristinely to let the person acclimate, so that every time they come in, they're in a very similar state as every other time they come in. We do a pre-scan. We see if they're in pattern or not. If they're not in pattern, that means there's nothing for us to work on. If they are in pattern, we use our other assessments to verify. We deliver the adjustment when appropriate. We let them rest so the body can deal with the concussive forces that we just delivered. Allow the body to recover and regain some adaptive resilience. Start to manifest that adaptation, start to express that resilience, so that when we do a post-scan, 17 minutes later, we can see if there's balance, if there's adaptation back in the system. This technology, regardless of who makes it, has that ability, has that usefulness in the clinical setting to not only do what we say we do, to measure the thing we say we measure, to see the effects of what we say we do, to prove to anybody with any kind of scientific knowledge about physiology, physics, math, technology, thermology, or thermography will clearly understand, yes, something wasn't balanced, something wasn't adaptive. You delivered the force, the body changed. Pre and post different, visit to visit different. We can also talk a little bit about where we're going with the adjustment is to get things balanced so that there's complete unity left and right, up and down. So that brings the graphs closer together so we can see over time improvement. So the evidence-based reason to use thermography in a clinical setting, I think, is overwhelming. It doesn't even depend on the technique. I was taught basic at Logan. I used diversified, Cox flexion distraction, Thompson, a bit of Gonstead, activator. It doesn't matter what the technique is. You can use thermography to, number one, see if what we say we take care of is there. I know I'm being redundant, but I think we need to hear this because the topic is, why would I want to use this in my practice anyway? What's the evidence? It's clear the evidence supports the technology. It's clear the evidence supports the physiology. It's clear the physics is there. The reliability, repeatability, precision, accuracy is there. It's non-invasive. Why wouldn't you want a technology like that to be employed pre and post every visit? We've talked about the history, we've talked about the physiology, we've talked about the physics, we've talked about the philosophy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the maths. We've got just a few moments here, so I'm just going to introduce the different things that we do here. One of the basic things, the direct temperature, the DT, the raw data that you get from the graphs is the left and the right side. After that, what you have is the delta T. That's the difference between the left and the right. And that shows up as your typical graphs, left, right, and center. After that, you have hybrid delta T, which I'll just show you a picture. I'm not going to get into that at all. Then you have pattern analysis 1, 2, and there's even higher ones. And then everybody likes the bar graph, but I will arm wrestle you to talk about the usefulness in a clinical setting. It does show changes over time. It's very informative to the client. No arguments there, but on the doctor level basis, we really need to see the raw data. We really need to see the delta T. The bar graph is kind of like a mushy delta T because it doesn't show us raw and it doesn't show us, there's some things that can go wrong there. Different discussions for a different time. I'm just going to mush through this real quick because you don't need to see this. Totally different. That was a totally different part of the presentation for a totally different setting. This is what I want to get to. This is the delta T. The colors there are the hybrid delta T's. That's just to show you. This is the center graph. This is what thermography was based on from the 1920s. We progressed to be left, right, and center. So if you look at these three graphs, you can see this one right here. There's 3 scans on it. This is the left side of the neck. Over here is the right side of the neck. And so these are actual temperatures taken from the bottom to the top of the back. So these two are full body scans, and this is just a cervical scan. And these are what were taken over a course of time. So you have left, you have right, then you have in the middle the delta. Delta in math means difference. So you have the difference. If you have the line right on the dark blue line here in the middle, that means left and right were exactly to the same temperature. Balance, possibly, definitely the same temperature, whether it was really hot or really cold. That doesn't matter as long as the difference is 0. That they're going to show up here, right here in the middle of this graph. One of the things we have to be careful of is if we just look at the raw temperature, would you say that these are identical or very similar graphs? And I would argue that on the left we have a very similar curve here, a very similar structure down here. So from here all the way down to here, it looks very similar on these 2 scans. Look on this scan, they're almost identical. They're just a degree apart. So, a little warmer than before. Um, so they look very similar. I would say if this was the only data I had to look at these, I would say this person is exhibiting what's called pattern. They're stuck. Between the time of these two scans, they haven't adapted. But when we add the middle one, we actually do the math, we can see that there's some massive changes going on here. Even though the curves within the left and the right are similar, the difference shows that they are changing. They are changing. They're staying in sync with each other, but they're also not linked to each other. They're changing over time. And so this shows me some extreme, well, not extreme, but very good adaptation and change. But right here, they're almost identical. In fact, they are identical right here, slope and everything. And then this curve right here, I would also consider that possibly a pattern. Again, we only have 2 scans. All it's showing us is 2 points in time. I would really feel more comfortable with more scans. This shows why we need the raw data. This shows you why we need the delta. That's one of the beauties of doing virtual training, is everybody in the house gets to do whatever they want, include ride their motorcycle off into the sunset, and that's okay. That's why we need left, that's why we need right, that's what we need to center. These 3 pieces of data are critical when you analyze a scan. Here's another example. This is the center scan. This is a delta. It looks like, for all intents and purposes, this is almost the identical scan when you look at it. Almost identical scan, a little bit different up here. But I would say this person would definitely be in pattern. If all you had was the delta T, one needle showing left and right breaks, one graph, bubble bar, whatever, this could lead you astray, because this is the actual scans, the raw data on the left, raw data on the right. They are not the same. There is adaptation going on down here. They're different, and they're harmonious. They're changing together, so much so that the difference is within this established normal for this person. The balance is right there. Up here, that might be similar, but down here, definitely not similar. So we need all of the data to look at. The assessment technology itself is not going to tell us there is and where and what listing it is. It's going to tell us if there's not a stuck adaptation. We have to be the doctors at some point and say, okay, I'll take that piece of information, take it and add it on to this piece of information, and roll it into being a doctor and making it work. Here's a bar graph. You can see changes over time, but there's just so much mushy math that goes into this. This is great to give a client to show them how they're progressing. They're all right-sided, balance. Oh, inflammation, something happened there, and now this is today, and they're still right side dominant, but they're getting back to balance. That's what you would use that for. Again, I'm not going to go into this so much. I hope that was a little bit more clear on what the technology does. There's a lot more training. And no matter what system you have, there's a lot of training out there to help you decipher what information you get. This is, again, a very useful tool. It's very well understood. It's very well researched. It is used to validate other studies. It's been tested inside and outside of chiropractic. It's been around for a very long time. It's trustable. It's trustworthy. It's worthy of your trust. It's worthy of your investigation. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you got something of benefit out of this. If you have any questions, or if you want the references for anything that I did, please do not hesitate to give me an email. Send me an email. It's dochoskins@titronics.com. I'd be more than happy to send that out to you. If you have any further questions on how to implement it in your practice, obviously, I'll consult with you no matter what technology you use, no matter who makes it. I think that the technology, the assessment tool, and the amount of clarity and conviction and certainty that this can provide the practitioner and the client, that goes above and beyond the clinical implications of helping us determine that, do we need to do what we say we do as chiropractors? Did we make a change? How much of a change is made over time? All of that, it makes this technology extremely valuable, very valuable. Again, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to try to keep this under my 60 minutes. He said between 59 and 60. So, again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. It's been an honor and pleasure. Dr. Curry, thank you so much.